In the last two parts, I went over the mess that is fares and fare policies of local transit agencies in the Greater Toronto Area. For context, I recommend watching the previous two parts first. Now let's consider GO Transit, the regional operator, which will complicate things a little more. Anytime you take a GO Transit bus or train, regardless of the distance of your trip, you are eligible for the co-fare discount. Local transit before and after a GO Transit trip is free for most transit agencies, with a few caveats. All agencies shown on the map currently participate in the co-fare program except for the TTC, though that will change soon in March 2024 with the One Fare program. For this video, from here on, when I say local transit, I mean every local transit agency except for the TTC. This is how the co-fare discount works. If you're traveling to a GO station or stop, you would first tap your Presto card to pay on a local transit agency's bus. You'll get charged the usual fare and get the usual 2-hour transfer for that transit agency. As long as you're still within the 2-hour transfer window from when you tapped on the first local bus, when you board a GO bus or tap in at a GO station, you will only get charged the difference between the minimum GO fare and the local transit fare, effectively making the local transit segment free. If you're traveling from a GO station or stop, as long as you're still within the 3-hour maximum window of GO Transit on a subsequent bus of a local transit agency, you tap on but won't be charged anything extra, effectively making the local transit trip free as well. Just because you've already taken one local transit trip before or after GO Transit does not affect your eligibility for the other, meaning that you could be discounted both the local transit trip before and after taking GO Transit. This is completely independent of whether the transfer from the first local transit agency is accepted or still valid on the other end. Now, you may have noticed that the minimum GO fare can be cheaper than a local transit agency's flat fare depending on the fare category. Since GO Transit's fares are zone-based, whether taking GO is cheaper varies on a case-by-case basis. In general, shorter distance trips on GO Transit are more likely to be cheaper than longer distance trips. There is no definitive pattern, as some zones cover larger areas and more stops than others, meaning that you could travel very far but still remain in the same contiguous zone. More often than not, despite going from the same point A to point B, even the route that you choose may incur a different fare, with longer, less direct journeys typically being more expensive. So it is worth checking on the GO Transit website through their trip planning tool what the exact fare would be for each trip in question. For example, since GO Transit and UP Express are the only transit providers that offer post-secondary students discounts on single-ride fares, it is probably cheaper for a student to take GO Transit between two very close stops rather than the bus of the local transit agency in the area. Even adults could benefit taking GO between two very close stops served by York Region Transit, as the minimum GO fare is 18 cents cheaper than the adult York Region Transit fare. And since pretty much any local transit before or after GO is free due to the co-fare program, this means that sometimes it is cheaper to take GO, even if it doesn't make sense to take GO, either because it's a less direct route or it's in the opposite direction of where you want to go. This is similar to the South Common Centre example I provided in part 1, where if you first tap in on an Oakville bus and then take your desired MyWay bus, you'd actually pay less. Here's another example. Someone traveling from the Winston Churchill Transitway station across Mississauga to the Renforth Transitway station can either take the more frequent MyWay Route 109 bus or the hourly Guelph-Mississauga Route 29 GO bus. Its higher cost for this particular trip across all fare categories from start to end means that most people would be inclined to take the MyWay bus instead. However, since taking MyWay before or after GO is free and the minimum GO fare is cheaper than the MyWay fare for post-secondary students, a student who would otherwise pay an adult fare on MyWay, as MyWay has no post-secondary discount, would actually save money taking the GO bus for just one stop at any part of the journey, say between Winston Churchill and Erin Mills, and then switching to a MyWay bus the rest of the way to Renforth. Here's a side-by-side comparison of all options. If you take MyWay all the way, you are charged the flat $3.20 MyWay fare at the beginning of your ride, and that's it. If you take Go all the way, you are charged the $2.64 minimum fare at the beginning of your ride and an additional $1.47 at the end of your ride for a grand total of $4.11. But this is what happens if you take Go for one stop, followed by MyWay. At Winston Churchill, if you first board a Go bus, you are charged the $2.64 minimum fare. At Erin Mills, when leaving the Go bus, you tap out, and since this particular trip is only one zone, you are not charged anything extra for this Go trip. You now have a transfer valid 3 hours from when you boarded the Go bus to continue on subsequent Go buses, Go trains, or local transit agencies. Boarding a MyWay bus within this window and then taking it the rest of the way is therefore free. Your grand total in this scenario would be $2.64, meaning that this is the cheapest option. Go fares, sometimes being cheaper than local transit, also introduces an interesting fare collection consequence. Let's change the last example up a bit. If a post-secondary student takes the Go bus at the end after MyWay rather than at the start, which in this case could be from the second last Go stop on the transitway, Dixie, this is what happens. At Winston Churchill, when you board a MyWay bus, you pay the $3.20 MyWay fare as usual. At Dixie, you get off the MyWay bus and then tap in on a Go bus. And finally, when you tap out at Renforth, because this post-secondary student fare, $2.64, is lower than the $3.20 MyWay fare of the ride before, and because of the co-fare discount program, you are actually refunded the 56-cent difference when taking Go. Your grand total would then be $2.64, which is exactly the same as the previous example. So, taking Go as a post-secondary student, even if not necessary for your trip in particular, could actually save you money. And yes, I've confirmed this to be true. Another reason why you should consider taking the Go for at least one stop, whether or not it makes sense for your journey, is because doing so may effectively extend the validity of your transfer from the usual 2 hours up to a maximum of 5 hours. This is especially useful for situations where you want to make a round-trip journey and you know you won't be spending much time at the destination. Let me explain. Provided that you start taking Go anytime within the 2 hours of the start of your local transit leg of your journey, up to and including 2 hours after you started your local leg, your local transit fare is refunded and you get a fresh 3-hour transfer back to local transit. Up to 2 hours to get to Go, plus the 3 hours after you start on Go, equals up to 5 hours. And no, you do not have to take Go both ways for this to work. Just one trip taken strategically in the middle of your round trip in any direction for any part of your entire journey will do the trick. And even though you may be paying slightly more for the transfer window, such as the minimum $3.70 adult Go fare rather than the $3.20 adult MyWay fare, most of that time, that slight difference in taking Go one way or even both ways will often be less than 2 one-way local transit fares combined. In the case of MyWay, that is a total of $6.40 for adults. So the conclusion is, in the right circumstances, taking Go for short distances, even just one way, as part of a round trip can actually cost less than taking local transit alone, and will give you a longer free transfer window of up to 5 hours instead of the usual 2 hours. If you take a trip involving multiple Go transit legs, for example, a Go bus followed by a Go train, any subsequent fares you pay within the 3-hour window likely won't be as much as the full fare for each Go leg taken alone. Unfortunately, there isn't much clear information on this matter aside from trying out different trips on the trip planning tool of the Go Transit website. Let's say you take a Go bus from Square One in Mississauga to Kipling Station in Toronto. Believe it or not, that is considered a single zone trip, which costs $3.70 for adults. If you then take a Milton Line train afterwards from Kipling to Union Station, it only costs you up to 5 cents extra according to the trip planning tool, when that extra leg alone would have been $4.76, which is even more than the $3.70 Mississauga to Kipling trip alone. I do have to say this is only possible during the weekday morning rush hour, as Toronto-bound Milton Line trains typically operate during weekday morning rush hour only. These extra 5 cents you would pay to take the Milton Line train from Kipling to Union are, funnily enough, not even close to the separate $3.30 TTC fare that you would currently have to pay if you took the subway from Kipling to Union instead of the train, which is not a crazy idea, as the Milton Line train service, as I've already mentioned, is quite limited outside outside of rush hour. When the One Fare program begins in March 2024, it'll actually be cheaper to transfer to the subway, as the TTC fare would be 100% subsidized. But the subway takes longer, and personally, if I had the choice and the chance, I would gladly pay 5 cents to travel faster to Union Station. To make things even stranger, the total fare that you would pay taking the 29 bus from Square One to Kipling, then the Milton line from Kipling to Union, is different from the total fare that you would pay if you took the 21 from Square One to Port Credit, then the Lakeshore West Line train from Port Credit to Union. The latter is $5.01 instead of $3.75 for adults, even though you have no choice outside of rush hour to take this more expensive option, despite the origin and destination being exactly the same. Let me know in the comments of more examples you may have of situations like these. Using GO Transit paper tickets purchased through ticket machines or e-tickets purchased online is almost always more expensive than using Presto, because when you use Presto, you get a minimum of 15.7% off the regular ticket fare. But Presto isn't always the cheaper option, especially for very long distance or indirect trips. It is no surprise that GO Transit is oriented towards medium to long distance, 30 to 50 kilometer journeys going to and from Union Station, and the fares in the fare system reflect that. Everyone else, that is, very long distance and short distance travelers, seem to be an afterthought. The fact of the matter is, your Presto journeys, according to GO Transit, must be completed in 3 hours. This is a problem, as some hypothetical journeys throughout the GTA may be longer than that. If it has been more than 3 hours since you've tapped in with your Presto card, it is assumed that you forgot to tap off and will be charged the maximum fare to the end of the train line or bus route in question. Subsequent legs of the journey, past 3 hours, are considered separate trips, thus ineligible for the previously discussed discounted transfer fares. So for these two reasons, any trip longer than 3 hours is more likely to be more expensive with a Presto card than with a ticket. Therefore, it may be better to use paper or e-tickets for trips longer than 3 hours in order to avoid the separate trip problem. And also because you would have 4 hours of validity instead of 3 to complete your GO trip. Take Niagara Falls to Peterborough as an example of a very long distance trip. The Niagara Falls to Union portion costs $17.79 for adults if a Presto card is used, and the Union to Peterborough portion costs $19.19. Since this trip is over 3 hours, these will likely be considered separate trips, meaning that the grand total is $36.98, whereas purchasing an adult ticket between Niagara Falls and Peterborough costs just $36.85. Not a big difference in this example, but you get the idea. And now for the situation of less direct trips costing more with Presto than if you had used tickets. When you buy a GO Transit ticket, the assumption is that you'll take the shortest and most direct route. You are given a suggested itinerary, but you are under no obligation to take this suggested itinerary. It may be that a less direct route is a better option with a shorter travel time, especially in underserved areas where you're forced to take a certain route or where there are certain line closures in place. When you use a Presto card instead of a ticket, however, since you're tapping on and off for every leg of your journey, GO Transit can tell whether you've taken a less direct, longer distance trip, thereby charging you more for the further distance you've traveled on GO. If you're traveling from Square One to Union Station, GO will sometimes recommend taking the GO bus north to Bramley GO Station, then taking the Kitchener Line train to Union Station, which will cost you a grand total of $8.30 with an adult Presto card. This is, of course, higher than the $5.01 you would have spent with Presto if you had taken the shorter distance trip of the 21 bus to Port Credit, followed by the Lakeshore West train to Union Station. A paper or e-ticket between Square One and Union is $7.55, more than Presto if you go via Port Credit, but less than Presto if you go via Bramley. Keep in mind, however, that the e-tickets are typically not acceptable for the co-fare discount. This is up to every local transit agency and up to the discretion of the bus driver, but generally it's not acceptable. If the hassle of figuring out which fare medium is cheaper for very long distance trips still doesn't convince you that GO fares need an overhaul, then you need to take a look at the other extreme, short distance trips, especially within the city of Toronto. Rides within Toronto, the densest area GO Transit serves, are relatively way more expensive per kilometer and, more often than not, way more expensive than the TTC. This is especially frustrating, like for those living in Scarborough who have just lost TTC Line 3 in 2023, but already have the GO Stouffville line that costs almost double as much to use as the TTC. The One Fare program will make this better by not requiring those who take GO Transit to pay a separate TTC fare if they take the TTC before or after GO, but still, the GO Transit fare alone is nowhere near as affordable as the TTC fares currently are. Some could argue that the TTC fares are too low, but either way, at the moment, many people are refusing to take the faster and, in my opinion, better GO train just because of the cost. In my opinion, the One Fare program should be extended to include a lowest fare guarantee, so that the fare passengers pay to get from one point to another in the GTA will be the fare of the cheapest possible theoretical journey, regardless of which agencies they actually use to get there and regardless of how direct their actual journey is. This would especially be helpful for residents of Scarborough or any people currently traveling between two areas served by GO but avoiding GO due to its higher cost. And things only get more complicated if you consider the weekend passes and the weekday group passes, which can only be purchased online. The passes are not eligible for the co-fare program. That's something you'll want to keep in mind when figuring out the cheapest possible option. Generally, for the $10 24-hour weekend pass, this means that if you have to take any other transit agencies for any part of your trip, it may not be worthwhile using the $10 weekend pass. Also, the weekday group pass is $30, so if you're taking one or more trips during a 24-hour period over $30 in total, and if you're alone, as there is no rule explicitly preventing a single person from using a group pass, theoretically, you could purchase the group pass and save money on these journeys. Fixing this is simple. In addition to offering the passes online, a fare cap should be in effect on Presto cards. $10 over a rolling 24-hour window during the weekends or holidays, and $30 maximum fare on weekdays. Hopefully, I've convinced you that the fare system is way more complicated than it has to be, but it doesn't have to be this way. The fare system as is works for most people currently using the system, but it is clearly not designed with everyone in mind, even though it should be when you're responsible for moving millions of people in the Greater Toronto area. The mutual acceptance of transfers between local agencies, the GO Transit co-fare program, and the upcoming One Fare program go a long way towards achieving what I consider true fare integration, where you can hop on any combination of any agency's services to get from point A to point B for the exact same fare. Imaginary lines and boundaries on a map shouldn't force you to pay two fares. You should not be punished for choosing to take one route over another. The fare system should be overhauled to maximize ridership, efficiency, affordability, and convenience at the same time, which it's not achieving at the moment. It can change for the better if all of the transit agencies and the provincial government actually work together to achieve true fare integration throughout the region. And it should be done now, as the best time for change is now. And with that, we've reached the end of this 3-part series. If you enjoyed this video and want more content like this, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to this channel. Thanks for watching.